I always wish I had a wife at this time of the year.
Yeah.
I need one.
Roxanne is baking away.
Thank you, councillors.
Where's the business bit?
Just reminding councillors of this mayoral proposal, the changes from the past, when the mayor would table at this meeting the annual plan or the LTP without any of us having any input. This has been quite a different process. So over the last few months we have brought issues to the Finance Committee. We have also workshopped it, various issues, and we've brought them to the Finance Committee and passed resolutions to let the Mayor know where we felt the direction for his annual plan round this year should go and what areas that we felt needed more work or more consultation. So I'd invite Mayor Brown to present his mayoral proposal to the Finance Committee.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and councillors, you have their hard copy of what is proposed. I will speak loosely to this and rather reflect, certainly the front end, and for not great a period of time, on the sixth budget to be presented to the First United Council of Auckland. I think it's fair to say that against the backdrop of this budget, it has been 5 very challenging years in terms of budget setting, and only 5 months ago we passed off the LTP after a very long and vigorous and rigorous debate. I think it's also worth reminding ourselves that we are implementing the will of legislation. So many of our discussions have been against the backdrop of implementing that will. First of all, the amalgamation of the 7 councils into one, and then secondly, putting in place capital value as the only method of rating. Also, it was against my commitments as the first mayor that in the first term in particular, we would try and implement the legacy LTPs. I guess if one is to look back with the benefit of hindsight, I would have been less rigorous in that and have taken a more hands-on approach rather than just implement, but I've made some pretty strong commitments through the 2010 campaign. And so really the last LTP was an opportunity to really reset against the backdrop of how we were going as an amalgamated city council. Secondly, the reason why this proposal ostensibly picks up the LTP and in particular reflects the concerns that you expressed to me over the last 4 or 5 months, and as I've listened to the community going around in particular in the last 3 months on a transport escapade across the community with public meetings every week. This presents us with an opportunity to take a much more steady as she goes approach with minimal change. So there would be no surprises in this proposal to you at all. There is firstly a budget presented to you with no transition presently operating, and secondly with no revaluation for us to consider. So this is an opportunity for us to go to the community with the final rate revenue figure set that will by and large apply across the community but for the business differential. So I think when most of you are going into an election process, the sense of continuity and certainty around the budgets as against what we proposed in the LTP should be a fairly enticing prospect. I also just want to take the opportunity of reiterating what this budget and the LTP is set against. Continuous population growth of 3%, growing probably faster than we've ever grown as a city, And in the last 5 years, a city the size of Hamilton has in effect moved into Auckland. Our GDP growth rates, although that's great, it also adds extra impetus and pressure to how we set our budget. So we're growing at about 4%, which is a pretty impressive figure. Adds about 35,000 jobs a year, and it's around $3 billion worth of extra economic growth a year. Something that I think, by and large, the people of New Zealand should be pleased with, and our people should be too, because of course it's providing a huge number of jobs extra. And this compounded, added to and embellished by the number of tourists are shifting in here, extra 7% of tourist growth a year, and you see something like 18% extra coming out of China and America a year. That's great, but it adds pressure to our budget. Against all of that, we have maintained through these 5 years, going into the sixth, a AA Standard & Poor's rating. And as Susan is constantly reiterating to us, that is very significant and important when you bear in mind, in particular, our financial and treasury targets and criteria, and as we look to manage our debt going forward. Three things that I think we need to just reflect on, and you will see the graphs in the proposal, so I won't specifically talk to those. The fact that we will have an opportunity through this annual plan where we are by and large looking to maintain the direction of the LTP, to really continue to communicate with our people about the size of this budget, a $5 billion budget every year, that we continue to communicate with them an understanding around what role debt plays in an organisation this big, dealing with the types of population and economic growth. So we have managed now to put debt, I think, in a much better frame, and we will discuss that more reflectively through these next 8 or 9 months. Debt capped at 12% revenue per annum, what that means, and that our community has a more sophisticated and better understanding of that. Secondly, our costs, of course, are the subject of constant discussion. But if you have a look at the graphs, you'll see that by and large our cost has remained reasonably consistent, even though we have been growing at the rates that we have, really for the last 5 years. And thirdly, I just want to reflect, so much of our discussion around this table is about our costs, it's about our rates, but of course the only reason why we take those costs and rates on is because we're building and investing in a very, very significant city. And just have a look on page 5 of the report over the last 5 years where our spending has been. Huge and significant spending going into transportation, everything under the ground that we don't see, and continued investment in our community infrastructure. So 2016-17, therefore, will present an opportunity for us to reflect on a steady-as-she-goes approach, but we will continue to make significant and major investment into the city. A capital program of $1.9 billion, which includes a transport program of $720 million, water and wastewater $440 million, and investment in parks, sport and recreation $170 million. You'll see there on page 7 the amount of investment that will go in and around our community. Headlined, of course, with the commencement of construction of City Rail Link, with the early works starting this month. Right around the city, the Walkworth Showgrounds, the Waiaku Sports Park at last, haven't been part of the initial discussions of the front end of that. It's great to see that taking off. Pioneer Woman and Alan Melville Hall and the potential work that will go on there in terms of what is presently Cartoon Place, but I suspect is going to get renamed. The Albion Stadium Pool and significant continuing roadworks, and stage 2 of the Silverdale Park and Ride is a part of the work that came through from our transportation levy. I'm proposing, as you are aware, we agreed standard 3.2% increases in rating revenue. I'm proposing that we close out this LTP, this annual plan at 2.5. I'm not proposing cuts to services or anything like that. Believe that we are capable of achieving and delivering that through macro level work around depreciation, asset management. As we know, we're awaiting work for in the area of maximising benefits from our assets from Sue, and I suspect all of that work will enable us to commence a program of work at the end of this annual plan at around 2.5. Now, what we will do through this annual plan round is, as we've agreed through previous discussions, and I've incorporated this into the mayoral proposal, is in particular deal with a proposal coming through for the interim transport levy. In the second year of this, Councillor Ross is proposing that we take out as a further option a levy that would be that would shift more of the burden to business, and I have incorporated that in the proposal here, and I think that's a good way for us to continue to discuss with the community the issue of the interim transport levy. Secondly, the UAGC, we had a good discussion, and I want certainly for us to continue in this annual plan process to get the community's feel for it, so levels of consultation between 350 and 650. It's a good way for us to start to go forward. We have got Māori freehold land rates remission work that we need to do, take that out to the community, as well as rates for large farms. That will be canvassed through the rural community, and targeted rate for septic tank replacement. And this will be subject to a separate report on the 17th of December 2016. Now, we also have a body of work that has come to us from Councillor Penny Hulse and those in the Western Wards that relates in particular to some further work that we want to take out to our community. So just want to bring that to your attention also. So councillors, there are some work to do in terms of consultation, but otherwise, as we have agreed and put in place in terms of policy positioning, it's my opportunity as the Mayor to bring this to you for a report, and then for a substantive discussion starting at the governing body next week, and an opportunity for us to direct into, for final discussion and agreement in June next year, a position that supports by and large that concluded in the LTP and gives our community very clear directions as to how we're going forward, and a degree of certainty and directness that we haven't been able to experience thus far in the 5 budgets, because of the need for us to reset in the last LTP and bring all of the budgets together from the councils previously in the first term. So, councillors, that's the mayoral proposal. No surprises, by and large, as we have discussed, and an opportunity now to kick the process off and take this through for substantive discussion at the governing body, and then on to our communities. Thank you.
Would you like to move it?
I'll move it, Madam Chair.
Helps. Moved, seconded by me. Right, questions, comments? Okay, right. So we moved Councillor Cashmore.
Madam Chair, I read some detail about, I think it was Sandra Coney's proposed about the septic tank as a sort of part of a retrofit home. Are we going to get a presentation on the more detail around that?
Yep.
How that actually works now?
Yep.
Cool. Thank you.
Yes, that's coming to the governing body.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Councillor Cooper?
Thank you. I mean, I think the wastewater treatment septic tank, whatever we call them nowadays, I mean, it fits in line with our freshwater management policy, and we've done quite a lot of work around the lagoon health, and the lagoons on the west coast are some of the grubbiest high bacterial counts in the region. So I think if we can do this with the community and enable them to deal with their own private arrangements for disposing of their sewage, it does help. It does help in a public health sense. It does support the community. So I think that I know it's often not a favoured thing to do, but it's within the funding envelope, and I think that's what's good about it. It's, you know, skins more than one cat, and I think it's a really good way to deal with those contamination issues, which is a very, especially in Pihas, one of the most visited spots in the region. So I think it's really important, and it behoves us to keep the public's health safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I could see some benefits for areas of Rodney too, but we'll discuss that next week. Any other questions, councillor?
Oh, I just want to make some comments if you want to do questions first.
Yeah. No comments?
Oh, okay. I'm the only one. I'll get the first and last say. Thank you, George.
No,
Thank you,
George is
George.
gonna follow up.
He doesn't like that, eh?
Dad's going to follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I appreciate that this and the Mayor's efforts here around this being a no surprises document, and it largely is, but nonetheless I want to just take the opportunity to shine some light on a few things for people to consider over the coming week and months. The UAGC, it's great that where we landed for that bracket between 350 and 650. Some of us pushed a few months ago for that to be an annual consideration. That was adopted by the Mayor, and so that is good that is now going to be incorporated. But it was lost largely, the UAGC debate, in the LTP, the 10-year budget, because so much focus was put on transport and transport funding. Yep. And I do really implore the staff to come up with a way that we can meaningfully communicate the UAGC issue, so we can get some meaningful and considered feedback back from the community. And the document here, the Mayor's document, rightly says that the UAGC quote affects the distribution of rates between higher and lower value properties. And I also hear, Madam Chair, the call for rating stability now, but I suppose I didn't hear that call in the last few years when we, as an organisation, there's a claim here that it was inevitable that rates went up, but as an organisation, and as the Prime Minister pointed out at the time, we had the ability to pull one equity lever, and that was the UAGC. And subsequently, while there might be the call for equity and stability now, there certainly wasn't over the last 5 years when many ratepayers, particularly in my ward and others, were faced with ongoing compounding year-on-year 10% rates increases. So the UAGC is an important lever, and we need our communities that support a higher UAGC, which I believe is well overdue, to come out and have their say. On the myth-busting stuff here, Madam Chair, and I was interested in that. I remember the fifth Labor government went out and put a paper about myth-busting too in about 2008, and I just see that as disingenuous at one point, because these aren't so much myths, but these are genuine concerns that the Auckland public, the business community, the public, community organisations and ratepayers associations and the likes genuinely have. And if they weren't genuine, then they wouldn't have been raised by the Labor mayoral candidate with such comprehension, and they wouldn't be forming the basis of the mayoral election, which they will. And so you can say they're myths, but these headlines here are going to be the basis of the next mayoral election and where people's interest will largely be. A couple of things. The forecast, we're saying that we're doing better than the forecast legacy councils on their projected rates increases, but that was from their 2009 LTPs, Madam Chair, and we all know that they were facing amalgamation, and we all know that they wouldn't have to fund those, and we all know that if there was an amalgamation, they would have knocked those projected rates increases into shape, as we do every year. We knock down the projected rates increases. So I disagree with the use of forecast legacy rate increases, because they would never have eventuated if there was not amalgamation in many aspects. Debt, just on the issue of debt, Madam Chair, none of us have an aversion to debt, but we need to realise, as we all do, that the more debt we have for intergenerational projects, the more interest rates and burden we will subsequently get, and the more revenue we will have to make to keep, as the document says, to keep our interest to revenue prudential ratios down. So I think it's important to consider that yes to debt. I'm pleased that the track has been contained by Mayor Brown and dropped by 20%, but let's not also forget that when you look at our LTP track, we are heading from 400 million per annum in interest repayments to close to $750 million, and that will limit per annum, and that will limit future generations and choices. And I know, Madam Chair, that you always say we all have mortgages, or we all bought our first house with a mortgage. Well, in this instance, this is quite different. This is a mortgage where the asset's not realisable, where the interest commitment's going to double, probably not halve over 10 years like a lot of people with interest rates, and where the principal's not going to be paid off in the future. So we can all say, well, we've all got mortgages, but this one is one that's getting bigger, and one that's commitments are getting bigger, and one that the assets that we always say that our ratios are good will grow, but they'll mostly never be realisable. In saying that, Madam Chair, I'm disappointed that the asset review, we spent $500,000 or whatever it was on the asset review by the two consultants, and that forms no part of this discussion. And frankly, it will be part of our consultation, the feedback, the have your say, the submissions, and so we need to frame that up in this annual plan document so people can have some kind of context, because if we're expecting for them to read the Cameron and Partners and EY reports last month and to wait till 2018-19 LTP to have their say, then we're kidding ourselves. So we need the asset review to be dealt to. Finally, Madam Chair, on the composition of the targeted rate, transport targeted rate, I put up an amendment on the 25th of June which was lost narrowly 9 points to 10 for the organisation to commit to the $58 that we consulted on, and that the organisation find much of the rest. That was narrowly lost, and so we were promised to look at the composition of the targeted rate. Well, what we've come back with is not the organisation